The day Ethan Cole lost his job started like every other Tuesday, until it didn't. The 40-year-old single father sat in the back row of a company meeting room, nervously tapping his fingers against a notepad, while executives discussed restructuring opportunities. Everyone knew what that phrase meant: layoffs. By noon, Ethan was carrying a cardboard box filled with family photos, a coffee mug, and 15 years of hard work reduced to a severance packet. As he walked through the parking lot beneath a gray sky, his phone buzzed. It was his 12-year-old daughter, Lily. "Dad, are you still coming to my science fair tonight?" she asked excitedly. Ethan forced a smile into his voice. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." He hung up and stared at the steering wheel of his aging pickup truck. His savings account contained barely enough money to cover 2 months of rent. The mortgage company had already sent warnings. Medical bills from his late wife's illness still haunted him. Yet somehow, he had to keep moving. For Lily, that night, while standing beside her award-winning project about renewable energy, Ethan watched his daughter explain how old materials could be transformed into something valuable. "People throw things away too quickly," she told the judges. "Sometimes treasure looks like trash first." The words lingered in Ethan's mind long after the event ended. 3 days later, while searching classified ads for work, he discovered an announcement that caught his attention. Titan Industrial Corporation, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the state, was auctioning off a neglected junkyard they had owned for decades. The listing described it as worthless land, cluttered with rusted machinery, broken vehicles, and scrap metal. Most investors ignored it. The company's CEO, Victor Langston, had publicly called it an expensive pile of garbage. Ethan couldn't explain why, but something about that property intrigued him. He drove 2 hours to see it in person. The place looked exactly as advertised. Acres of twisted metal, abandoned equipment, and weeds growing through cracked concrete. Yet as Ethan walked through the chaos, he noticed details others missed. Massive steel beams, copper wiring, industrial equipment that appeared damaged but repairable. Hidden beneath layers of neglect, he saw possibility. By sunset, an idea had formed. It wasn't fully clear yet, but it was enough to spark hope, and hope was something Ethan desperately needed. The auction took place on a rainy Thursday morning. Wealthy investors wandered around sipping coffee while joking about who would be foolish enough to buy the property. Ethan stood near the back, wearing a worn jacket and clutching paperwork with trembling hands. His entire severance package represented the maximum bid he could afford. Losing would mean returning home disappointed. Winning could mean financial ruin. As bidding began, most participants showed little interest. The land carried environmental concerns and required extensive cleanup. Several investors dropped out immediately. Ethan listened carefully as the price remained surprisingly low. Then, to his shock, the auctioneer announced a figure only slightly above what he could afford. Silence followed. Nobody raised a paddle. Ethan's heart pounded. Seconds felt like hours. Finally, he lifted his hand. "Sold," the auctioneer shouted. Just like that, Ethan became the owner of a junkyard, everyone else considered worthless. News of the purchase spread quickly. Friends called him crazy. Former coworkers questioned his judgment. Even Lily seemed uncertain. "Dad, are you sure about this?" she asked while looking at photographs of towering scrap piles. Ethan smiled despite his own fears. "No," he admitted, "but sometimes certainty comes after the first step." The following week he began exploring every corner of the property. Working alone from sunrise until dark, he cataloged materials, inspected machinery, and researched industrial recycling markets. What he discovered stunned him. Hidden among the debris were thousands of dollars worth of recoverable metals. Several abandoned machines contained rare components no longer manufactured. More importantly, a large section of unused land sat directly beside a growing transportation corridor. Real estate values in the area were rising rapidly. The junkyard wasn't worthless at all. It had simply been ignored. Yet recognizing value and unlocking it were two different challenges. Ethan lacked equipment, workers, and capital. Every day felt like an uphill battle. Then came an unexpected visitor. A local mechanic named Carlos arrived after hearing about the project. He offered to help repair old machinery in exchange for access to spare parts. Soon afterward, a retired welder named Frank volunteered his expertise. Gradually, a small team formed around Ethan's vision. They weren't investors or executives. They were ordinary people who believed hidden potential deserved a chance. Together, they began transforming the junkyard piece by piece. What nobody realized was that their progress was about to attract the attention of the very man who had dismissed the property as trash. Victor Langston had built his reputation on ruthless efficiency. As CEO of Titan Industrial, he believed numbers never lied. If a spreadsheet labeled something unprofitable, he moved on without hesitation. So when reports surfaced that a recently unemployed single father was finding value in the company's abandoned junkyard, Victor dismissed the stories as exaggerations. But curiosity eventually got the better of him. One afternoon, his helicopter landed near the property. Accompanied by several executives, Victor toured the site expecting confirmation of his original assessment. Instead, he found organized work zones, repaired machinery, sorted metal inventories, and dozens of local workers earning paychecks. Ethan greeted him politely. Victor glanced around skeptically. "You've certainly cleaned the place up," he said. "But let's be realistic. There's a difference between activity and profitability." Ethan remained calm. "Maybe. But there's also a difference between seeing junk and seeing opportunity." The CEO smirked. "Opportunity? In this?" Ethan led him toward a restored industrial press that had been buried beneath scrap. After repairs, the machine alone was worth more than Ethan had paid for the entire property. Victor's expression changed slightly. Then Ethan showed him inventory records, documenting valuable recovered metals and contracts with recycling companies. For the first time, Victor appeared uncomfortable, yet pride prevented him from admitting he might have been wrong. "Interesting," he said before leaving. "Good luck." As the helicopter disappeared into the distance, Ethan returned to work. He knew the journey was far from over. The property still faced environmental inspections, debt obligations, and infrastructure challenges. However, momentum was growing. Local media began covering the transformation. Community leaders praised the jobs being created. Businesses expressed interest in partnering with the operation. Most importantly, Lily spent weekends helping her father organize records and design future plans. For the first time since losing his job, Ethan felt optimistic. But success often attracts opposition. Weeks later, Titan Industrial unexpectedly announced plans for a massive logistics expansion in the region. Rumors spread that the company wanted land remarkably close to Ethan's property. Suddenly, the junkyard everyone had ignored became strategically valuable, and Victor Langston realized he might have made the biggest mistake of his career. What began as a forgotten wasteland was evolving into something far greater, and powerful forces were preparing to fight over it. 3 months after purchasing the junkyard, Ethan Cole stood on a small hill overlooking the property. As the morning sun reflected off rows of neatly organized steel, copper, and aluminum, what had once looked like a graveyard of rust now resembled a thriving industrial operation. Trucks moved in and out daily. Workers sorted materials. Repaired equipment hummed back to life. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he had almost forgotten existed: momentum. Yet success brought new challenges. The local newspaper published an article praising the transformation, calling it the comeback story of the year. The article spread quickly online. Investors who had laughed at Ethan's purchase suddenly became interested. Real estate brokers began calling non-stop. Some offered double what he had paid for the land. Others offered triple. Ethan rejected every proposal. He hadn't worked this hard to flip the property for a quick profit. He believed the junkyard could become something much bigger. One afternoon, while reviewing inventory reports inside a converted shipping container that served as an office, Ethan received a visit from a city planning official. The man carried maps and development documents. "You may want to see this," he said. Spread across the desk was a blueprint for a massive transportation corridor connecting several industrial regions. The route would pass directly beside Ethan's property. Warehouses, distribution centers, and logistics hubs were expected to follow. Land values would skyrocket. Ethan stared at the map in disbelief. Suddenly, everything made sense. The location itself might become more valuable than the recovered materials. But there was another detail that caught his attention. The largest proposed development belonged to Titan Industrial Corporation, the same company that had sold him the junkyard, the same CEO who had called it worthless. As Ethan studied the documents, a realization hit him. Victor Langston didn't simply regret selling the property. He needed it back, and powerful people rarely accepted losing something they wanted. The first offer arrived a week later. A representative from Titan Industrial walked into Ethan's office, carrying a briefcase and a polished smile. "Mr. Cole," he said, "Titan would like to repurchase the property." Ethan expected this moment. "For how much?" he asked. The representative slid a paper across the desk. Ethan's eyes widened. The amount was nearly 10 times what he had paid. It was more money than he had ever imagined possessing. Enough to eliminate debt, buy a house and secure Lily's future, yet something felt wrong. If Titan was willing to pay that much, the property was worth far more. Ethan folded the offer and handed it back. "No," the representative looked shocked. "Perhaps you misunderstood the number. I understood it perfectly." "Then why refuse?" Ethan smiled. "Because I think your company understands the property's value better than it did 3 months ago." The representative left without another word. Days later, Titan returned with a larger offer, then an even larger one. Each time Ethan declined, the situation quickly escalated. Environmental inspectors suddenly appeared and demanded additional reviews. Permit approvals slowed down. Suppliers reported receiving pressure from unknown sources. Rumors spread that the property contained contamination issues. Ethan recognized the strategy immediately. Someone wanted to make ownership difficult enough that he would surrender, but instead of giving up, he fought back. Community support became his greatest weapon. Local workers defended the project. Business owners publicly praised the jobs being created. News stations began covering the dispute. The story of a single father standing against a billion-dollar corporation captured public attention. Meanwhile, Ethan and his team continued uncovering surprises hidden throughout the junkyard. One afternoon, Carlos discovered a sealed warehouse buried behind overgrown vegetation. The structure had been forgotten for decades. Inside sat dozens of industrial machines preserved far better than anyone expected. Some contained rare components collectors and manufacturers desperately wanted. The inventory alone was worth millions. As word spread, buyers from across the country contacted Ethan. Revenue surged. What started as a gamble was becoming an empire, and Victor Langston was running out of patience. Late one evening, Ethan received an unexpected phone call. The caller identified himself as Victor Langston, not an assistant, not a lawyer, the CEO himself. "I think we should talk," Victor said. The following day, the two men met inside a private conference room overlooking the city's skyline. Victor skipped the small talk. "You've done impressive work," he admitted, "more than I expected." Ethan nodded but remained silent. "Let me save us both time," Victor continued. "Name your price." Ethan leaned back. "This isn't about money anymore." For the first time, Victor's confident expression cracked slightly. "Everything is about money." "Not everything." The CEO frowned. Ethan pointed toward the window where cranes and construction projects filled the horizon. "You saw junk, I saw potential. Hundreds of people now have jobs, because someone finally looked beyond appearances. That matters." Victor stared at him for several moments. Then he revealed something unexpected. Titan's planned expansion was already behind schedule. Without access to land surrounding Ethan's property, the project could lose hundreds of millions of dollars. Investors were demanding answers. Board members were furious. The company's future depended on correcting a mistake Victor had made personally. For a man who built his reputation on being right, the situation was unbearable. "You have leverage," Victor admitted quietly. "More than you realize." Ethan finally understood the full picture. This was no longer about a junkyard. It was about power, pride, and consequences. Victor had underestimated him. Now the cost of that mistake was growing every day. As the meeting ended, Victor stopped at the doorway. "Be careful, Ethan," he said. "Success changes people." Ethan looked him directly in the eye. "Maybe. But failure changes people too." After Victor left, Ethan sat alone in the room. He knew the battle was entering a new phase. Titan Industrial wasn't finished. Neither was Victor Langston. Yet Ethan had something the CEO didn't. He remembered what it felt like to have nothing, and people who have survived losing everything are often far harder to defeat than anyone expects. What neither man knew was that a discovery buried beneath the junkyard was about to change the stakes forever. A discovery so valuable, it would turn a local business dispute into a fight for a fortune neither side had imagined. The discovery happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Ethan had spent weeks reviewing old property records, searching for clues about forgotten structures hidden beneath decades of neglect. Most of the documents were incomplete, damaged, or missing entirely. Yet one faded blueprint kept drawing his attention. It showed an underground section of the property that didn't appear on any modern maps. Curious, Ethan organized a small excavation team and began investigating the area. At first they found nothing but layers of concrete and rusted debris. Then one excavator struck something solid. The sound echoed differently. Workers cleared away dirt and uncovered a massive reinforced steel hatch buried deep underground. Nobody knew it existed. Excitement spread quickly. After several hours of work, they managed to force the hatch open. What lay beneath stunned everyone. A huge underground storage facility stretched beneath part of the junkyard. Rows of industrial equipment sat untouched. Crates filled with rare manufacturing components lined the walls. Some items dated back decades and had become nearly impossible to find. Experts were called in immediately. Their assessments shocked even the most optimistic observers. The contents were worth tens of millions of dollars. News of the discovery exploded across the country. Television crews arrived. Financial analysts discussed the story on business programs. Social media turned Ethan into a symbol of perseverance and vision. But while the public celebrated, Victor Langston watched in silence from his office. Every news report felt like another reminder of the mistake he had made. The property he had called worthless was now one of the most valuable industrial sites in the region. Titan Industrial's board of directors demanded explanations. Investors questioned leadership decisions. For the first time in his career, Victor's authority was under threat. Yet what worried him most wasn't the lost money. It was the realization that Ethan's success had become impossible to ignore. The single father he once dismissed had transformed a forgotten junkyard into a fortune, and the story wasn't finished yet. Within weeks, major corporations began competing for partnerships with Ethan's growing operation. Manufacturing firms offered long-term contracts. Recycling companies proposed joint ventures. Real estate developers expressed interest in surrounding land. The numbers became staggering. What had started as a desperate gamble was evolving into a business empire, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet Ethan remained focused on something else. He remembered every sleepless night after losing his job. He remembered worrying about rent, medical bills, and Lily's future. He remembered feeling invisible. Determined not to forget those experiences, he announced plans that surprised everyone. Instead of selling the property outright, Ethan would build a community-focused industrial innovation center. The project would provide jobs, technical training, and opportunities for struggling families. Many advisors argued against the idea. "You could become richer than you ever imagined," they told him. Ethan simply smiled. How much money does one person really need? Construction began almost immediately. Abandoned sections of the junkyard were transformed into modern facilities. Training programs welcomed unemployed workers. Scholarships were created for local students interested in engineering and manufacturing. Lily, now deeply involved in the project, helped design educational programs focused on sustainability and innovation. The community rallied behind the vision. Meanwhile, pressure inside Titan Industrial reached a breaking point. Board members blamed Victor for selling the property. Financial losses mounted as competing companies secured opportunities Titan had hoped to control. Finally, during a tense executive meeting, Victor received devastating news. The board had voted to remove him as CEO. Years of power disappeared in a single afternoon. As he packed his belongings from the corner office he once considered untouchable, Victor found himself experiencing something unfamiliar: humility. For the first time he understood what it felt like to lose everything you thought defined your success. And strangely, that realization led him toward an unexpected decision. Several months later, Ethan stood on a stage overlooking thousands of people gathered for the grand opening of the Coal Innovation Center. The transformed property was almost unrecognizable. Modern buildings stood where mountains of scrap once towered. Green spaces surrounded advanced industrial facilities. Workers, families, students, and community leaders filled the audience. Lily stood proudly beside her father. As Ethan prepared to speak, he noticed a familiar figure near the back of the crowd. Victor Langston. No helicopter, no executives, no luxury entourage. Just a man standing quietly among ordinary people. After the ceremony ended, Victor approached Ethan. For a moment, then Victor extended his hand. "I owe you an apology," he said. Ethan looked surprised. "For what?" Victor glanced across the property, for only seeing what something was instead of what it could become. Ethan shook his hand. Most people make that mistake. Victor nodded. The difference is that you didn't. The two men walked together through the center,